Amy Laura will be discussing reclaiming vacant lots as it relates to urban farming. She is a staff attorney for the Garden Justice Legal Initiative at the Public Interest Law Center. She's been working really hard on our behalf about learning about vacant lots and sort of being a liaison between the community and the city with all the work she's been doing. So with that, Amy Laura, welcome.
My name is Amy Laura Khan. My first name is Amy Laura. And as Laura said, I'm a staff attorney at the Public Interest Law Center of Philadelphia. Hillcop, or the Law Center, has been around for about 40 years and does a host of things related to access to resources. We work on disability rights, we do a lot with special ed, we do deal with employment discrimination, housing rights, and for 30 years we've done work related to environmental justice. And my project kind of spins out of that environmental justice work. My predecessor, Adam Cutler, was working with a community in Hunting Park, and they were working on a lot of air quality issues. So they're saying, you know, our community is disproportionately burdened by truck traffic and emitting facilities, and our air quality is bad, which means that more people in that part of the city have respiratory problems. So they're dealing with that, but then they also looked around and they said, we also have all of these vacant lots, and let's try to figure out a way to deal with them. And so they actually got an EPA small grant, which was going to help them do that. And they said, oh, it should be easy to go find a lot. There's so many lots we want to do, but we want to have permission to do it. And then it took them 9 months to find a lot that they could get permission to be on. So they approached the city, the council person in that district, Councilwoman Karen Sanchez, completely supportive. They still couldn't find a city on the lot. They kept going around trying to find owners. They had a perfect lot, and they could find the owner, and wouldn't give them permission. He wanted to sell it to them for $20,000, even though it had been vacant for 20 years. And they finally actually created a partnership with a store owner that had owned a vacant lot next door, and that vacant lot had become a dumping site. So they created a garden there. This is their second season. It's gorgeous. I was there on Saturday. They're creating another garden behind a church. It's like a wide alleyway that's also been a dumping ground. And they're looking to create a third. And that happens all over the city. So that's happening now, it's happening, but it's been happening for years and years and years. So that's Hunting Park. On the other end of the spectrum, in terms of longevity, I work with a community group in South Philly on a tiny little block of Alter Street that butts up against the train tracks. Mrs. Mabel Wilson moved to that block in 1928. And she started greening vacant lots basically as soon as she got there. She incorporated an organization called Central Club in 1947, and they really have been gardening on those lots for 60 years, and were able to get title to those lots essentially by squatters' rights, because they had been there for that long, but now they're actually dealing with the tax burden. So I'll talk a little bit about that situation. But so it really runs the gamut. This is part of the history and the fabric of Philly, is we have all of this vacant land, and our residents are our vacant land stewards. And so people talk a lot about squatter gardening and guerrilla gardening and people going into vacant lots. It's really just gardening in Philly. It's like that's part of the culture of the city. And so I work to support people being able to do that. I work to support people being able to stay on those lots and to preserve those lots as gardens for the long term, and with a variety of strategies. So Laura asked me to come and talk to you specifically around the vacant lot issue. How do you get on a lot? How do you get land access? We'll talk about 3 different terms. One is land access, which is really just, I'm stepping on this lot, I can get on this lot and start growing on it. A second term is land, I often use it's called land tenure, where you actually have permission to be there. You can be there for a period of time. And then there's a third term I often use called land sovereignty, which is really like about land ownership. It's like you know it's yours, or you know it belongs to the community, and you know you can be there for the long term. And so my goal with working with gardeners is about trying to figure out, it's not just about access, getting on the lot and starting to grow, but either having a longer term agreement or permission to be there, or where it's possible getting ownership with, you know, either for an individual or a community group or a land trust or something like that, so we can preserve these institutions for the long term. So I would love to hear, I'm going to talk a bunch, but before I do that, it would be great to hear from you all kind of what brings you here. And then I have a few questions that I'm going to ask about kind of how long you've been gardening and things like that. So maybe we can just go around and people can say their names and what brings you to this, the garage today. Yes?
Okay. Now, this land here.
Is that folks aged out, you know, and there weren't people to pass it on to, and we're figuring out that now there's a bunch of young people who are really interested in this, so we're thinking we can turn that around. Two, there was a lack of resources. A lot of gardens were getting funded by the USDA, or by the feds. They cut the funding, which meant that with the Horticultural Society and Penn State Agricultural Extension had to cut their funding. And then the third thing in causing the loss of gardens was this land tenure issue. But now we're counting gardens, and what we count, our preliminary number is actually 385. So in 4 years, that's pretty significant. And then our next step is to look at the land ownership and to be able to say to the city, well, yes, we get, there are this many gardens, we need to be putting resources to them, and also we need to be helping people work through the land tenure stuff. So other stuff, we're going around. Hi, I'm Laura. Hi. Nice to meet you. We're going around, and I'm curious as to what brought people here today. So, sir?
Our estate, right.
Okay.
Oh, hi, I'm Andrew. I'm one of the interns with the State Urban Development, and I'm just really here to, hear you have to say, maybe get a few notes put on paper. And I think what we'd like to do is maybe end up putting a little note.
Say that a little louder. Come on.
I was gonna say, I think what we'd like to do, I'm yelling now. I think what we'd like to do is maybe put a little bit of that together and maybe end up putting it in our blog so we can get this a stable message out a little bit further and help more people. So
that's great. Cool.
Hi, I'm James Marshall. Saw the advertisement and I said, wow, this is, as a matter of fact, I came by just about 6 months ago when you were doing some stuff over in your garden over there.
Not me, but these folks.
And I think I talked to this gentleman here and his daughter. Right. About a project we were doing with, we were trying to get started with the Philadelphia High School.
That's
and
great.
we were doing an aquaponics program along with that. So kind of fell through, but I'm not going to give up.
Well, there is, I know Partnership CDC is now doing aquaponics, I think, are over on 63rd Street. So
Okay.
it's starting to emerge.
Okay, great.
And I just talked to someone this morning about a new aeroponics plan for West Village. So
It's a place opening up on 60th and Walnut.
maybe that's the partnership.
Yeah,
CDC.
it's on 60th Street. 'Cause
Yeah.
I was waiting for the bus and it says CDC. And I peeked in there and they had beds of plants there. Oh, okay.
With fish underneath.
So just a couple questions and just raise your hand. Of folks in the room, does everyone garden?
I used to.
Okay. Does anyone consider, so everyone considers yourself a community gardener of some sort. Is anyone, you're an urban farmer, would anyone else consider themselves an urban farmer?
I think it's just pretty urban here.
Well, it's pretty urban. Is anyone growing food for sale? You are. And that's how I sort of make the distinction. A community gardener is more about giving the food away or giving the food to the community or growing for your family. Like I would say I'm a community gardener. But if you're growing food, and the zoning code, we'll talk about that later. That's how the zoning code makes the distinction.
That's why I'm
You want to be a community gardener. Okay. Anyone want to be an urban farmer? Want to grow food for sale at this point?
We may, next year, if we can get an aquaponics thing going, waiting on a grant at Largo.
Cool. And how long have you been gardening?
30 years.
30 years. 2 years. 2 years?
Still running 60 years.
Other folks?
Zero.
Zero. Okay, you're starting on the ground zero.
Mid-80s.
All right, so there's a lot of knowledge in the room. And also, you know, what I'm hearing is you want to grow food, but you also want to reclaim the blighted lots and create community spaces. That's pretty, okay.
You say what the city wants?
Yes and no. Yes and no.
Either yes or no.
Yes and
Yes
no.
and
Yes
no.
and no.
Yeah.
Yes, but I think yes. I mean, so we'll talk about the city. So, I'm going to start by just talking about a city block. And I'm going to pass around this green sheet, so if everyone can take one, pass them around. But I'm also going to draw it here, because it's just sometimes easier. So this is a city block. It could be a block here, it could be in Kensington, it could be in South Philly. And so you have a house here, the house here, and then you got vacant, 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 house, vacant, vacant. More vacant than houses. And that is some blocks in this town. It's also easier for my example. So this is, you know, owner occupied. This one is owned by the city. Another one by the city. Another one, private owner. City. City. This is also city, so it's PHA, or Philadelphia Housing Authority. This is private. Again, this is a renter. And then this is private. And we'll add over here, this is a park. Just to shake things up a little bit. So we got two categories here. And that's kind of what, you know, I try to demystify, like looking at city block, you just see vacancy, but it's really different underneath when you start to explore. And if you look at the green sheets, did anyone, the extra, okay. So if you look at the green, so I gave you a couple options to try to find out who owns the lot. So your first step is you get the address. And if you don't, you know, it's a vacant lot, so it's not gonna have a number on it, but you look relative to the neighboring lots. And you figure out what the number is, you know what the street is, and then you can go 2 or 3 places online. One is the Philadelphia Office of Property Assessment. And I've got the website here. And that gives you, and I'm gonna call them OPA. So OPA has a property search function. And if you can enter the address, you can also enter the full block, so you can see ownership of the full block at one time. You can also look by, there's something called a BRT or an OPA number. So each property has their own number, you can look by the number. And then it'll tell you the owner's name, it'll tell you their last known address, it'll tell you, hey, how are you?
You saved your seat.
Hey,
Hi,
I just heard.
thanks for joining and bringing the younger generation.
Oh, that's right.
It'll tell you that if you click it, to go further a screen, it'll tell you the value of and the taxes owed by that on that property. So if there's any back taxes, it'll tell you the whole scope of that and all of the costs and fees associated. And then it'll tell you what kind of type of property is, whether it's vacant or not. So if it's a 2-story house or commercial or vacant. So that gives you a good picture. The problem with the OPA site is it doesn't have a map. And so sometimes it's actually, you think that it's really intuitive, like you think it's gonna be easy to figure out what the address is, but actually if you come out here and you're like, wait a minute, I wouldn't be able to know what number that is, or that's a big contiguous lot. How do I determine which is, what 4 lots are involved there, or however many. So another option is to go to the water department site. And the water department is a really progressive agency in our town. They're doing really good work as of the last couple of years. And they also upped the stormwater fees. So to be able to bill people appropriately, they had to have good mapping. So you can go to the Philadelphia stormwater map and click on every parcel. It tells you, one of the things it does is it's kind of color coded. So you can look just at the map and it's kind of like blocks of color. Or you can look at the aerial view like a Google map and it shows you, you know, what it would look like from the satellite camera. And it will show you what's impervious surface versus non-impervious, like impervious surface versus pervious surface? I guess it is. So basically concrete versus green space. So if it's concrete, it's either, you know, paved or it's a building, or if it's not impervious surface, then it's more likely to be a vacant lot. So that's gonna help you. You can click on the individual rectangles and it'll tell you what the lot number is, and then it'll give you the ownership, the owner's name. It's not gonna give you their address, it's not gonna tell you anything about taxes, so then you can take the next step and go to OPA if you want. But if it's owned by the city, it'll tell you that. So the third place, if you don't have internet access, you can actually go to the Department of Records at City Hall and ask them to help you through. They also have computers there, but it's a longer process. It's a little bit of a pain in the neck. And then the fourth resource, and we'll get there when we talk more about the city, is actually the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority's new website. But that is only just like that's only a narrow list of property. But you can search that via a list or via a map. So what you want to find out is who owns it. And then you start digging deeper. So, you know, we've got two categories here. We've got private, private, private. So 3 different privates, but it could look very differently, and your options in terms of accessing that lot, those lots are going to look very differently. So for example, this private lot, it could be abandoned, there could be a bunch of taxes on it, or maybe not. It could, you know, maybe it's just this person who owns it, or even the, you know, the owner of the rental property. And then if that's the case, the person is pretty accessible. You could probably go to them and you can say, well, hey, you have this lot here, nothing's happening with it. Can I get permission to start gardening on it? And it's really, that's kind of your simplest option. That is sort of, so, but, you know, you could just start doing it, but if you know, if the person's a known quantity, why not just ask? And then to take it up, you know, you could have an informal agreement, a verbal agreement, but you could also take it to the next level and actually have something in writing. And I have some sample lease agreements that I can always provide folks if they're looking for those. There are others online that if you actually search for them, you can find them and use that as a starting point and say, hey, you know, let's just set this out on paper and go from there. One thing that private owners may want is to make sure that there's liability insurance. And that's something that you might want to negotiate. So that's something that's coming up more and more in Philadelphia. Most gardeners I talk to, I ask them if they have insurance and if they've dealt with that. And majority of them will say no. And when we get to city-owned properties, the city, if you're going to be gardening on city-owned property, they're going to start requiring people to have liability insurance. So that's the easiest. But other privately owned lots could be, you know, could be some person who's out of state, hasn't paid their taxes in 30 years, and then another person who maybe they're deceased, and again, they haven't paid their taxes in 30 years, and at some point they stop being able to pay their taxes because they were deceased. The out-of-state person you can all, you know, or it could be, another option is, I don't know if you can actually read this, but like some sort of a corporate entity. Again, tax delinquent. And one of those things, you know, when you look on the OPA site for privately owned land, one of the things, the tax delinquency tells you a lot of things. I mean, it really does, it tells you basically if someone hasn't been paying taxes on this land, it's likely to be abandoned. Or they're likely not to get involved, or they're often likely not to be reachable. But it is worth reaching out sending a certified letter, and getting in touch and saying, hey, you know, there is this lot, we'd like to use it for gardening, can you give us an agreement? You know, and see where you go. But you'll know, I mean, we know there's we have in Philadelphia 40,000 vacant properties. 10,000 of them are owned by the city. We're going to talk about the city. 30,000 of them are owned by private owners that have basically thrown up their hands and said, we don't want to deal with this. So what do you do with those properties? The tax delinquency tells you a lot of things. I mean, it really it tells you basically if someone hasn't been paying taxes on this land, it's likely to be abandoned. Or they're likely not to get involved, or they're often likely not to be reachable. But it is worth reaching out, sending a certified letter, and getting in touch and saying, hey, you know, there is this lot, we'd like to use it for gardening, can you give us an agreement? You know, and see where if you want to purchase those properties, say if there's a lot, the taxes aren't particularly high, you can force it to go to sheriff's sale. So you can go to the sheriff's office, you can fill out an application. I've been told I've never done this with anyone, but I've been told that you put down $800 and then they go through the process to get it to sheriff's sale. It takes about 6 months. And they have to do the city has to do a couple things. Those are the privately owned lots. So if we come back to these folks, you know, here you've gotten an agreement, you've actually worked out something for liability insurance, you started growing, you know you're going to be able to be there for 5 years or 10 years or even just 1 year, whatever makes sense, and it depends on what your goals are. Here, you know, everyone's kind of looking around in the city and shrugging their shoulders and saying, we don't know what to do about these privately owned lots. You know, what are the risks? The risks are that someone comes back and kicks you off. I think that's your biggest risk. You know, what are the risks? The risks are that someone comes back and kicks you off. I think that's your biggest risk. The risks are maybe that you wouldn't be able to get liability insurance, depending, because, you know, I don't know that to be the case. I think it would depend on the provider. So this brings us to the city-owned properties, because that's a kind of a different situation, and it's a slightly more certain, but its own complexities. So okay, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 city-owned vacant lots. They could be owned by 4 different owners. They could be owned by, I'm just going to use the abbreviations, but you have the full names in the green sheet. PRA, which is the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority. It used to be called RDA, they changed the name. So you could say PRA or RDA. PHDC, the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. Public property, also known as the City of Philadelphia. And then PHA, Philadelphia Housing Authority, they own these 2 next door. They own the vacant lot, they own the house. So it used to be, until about a month ago, that you have 4 different city agencies that own that 10,000, I talk about the 10,000 city-owned vacant properties. It used to be you have 4 different city agencies and then you had 4 different policies for accessing those city-owned properties. So you would, in late May, I didn't call PHA because they're not very receptive to gardening, but I called Redevelopment Authority, PHDC, Public Property, and as well as the Office of Housing and Community Development, that is another way in. And they gave me 3 different ideas of how do you get an agreement to garden on that land. And they also told me different things about each of the other agencies. And that's kind of how it's been historically. But the bottom line is what you were able to do is you were able to get, at least from public property, and but not very often from these 2, what's called an urban garden agreement. It was a 1-year agreement, otherwise known as a 1-year license. It was not a lease. So you guys understand, you know, many of you are probably renters or at least have been renters at some point. With a lease, say a 1-year lease, you have permission to be in a house or on that lot, and nobody can just kick you out. You know, if you have a 1-year lease, it's for a term, and at the end of that term, you may have to renegotiate it. But at least it's a property right. And you know, maybe there are things in your lease that say if you do X, Y, and Z, like if you, I don't know, if you sublet your apartment or if you sublet the lot, then they can kick you out because you're breaking the lease. But at the core, you get to be there. With an agreement or a license, it's just permission. It's just when I'm going back to the beginning when I said land access, it's really just access. You can be there, nobody can, you know, your neighbor can't come kick you off because you have permission from the owner. But if someone comes along and they want to buy that lot, the city can kick you off, and they can kick you off at any time. All they would say, promise is, we're going to do our best not to kick you off during the growing season. So, you know, it was good for a lot of people because, you know, nobody was really taking any of these lots, and it was, you know, it was fine, but it also meant that at any time they could just lose it. So it comes back to that thing of, well, if I want to get a grant, or if I want to get financing, I want to get some investment in this, I know that next year I could just be gone. At any time I can just be gone. So the city has known it's had to deal with the 10,000 vacant properties. It's known the whole thing was a problem, and it's known that, like, it's not just for gardens that there were 3 different sets of policies to deal with. It's for developers, it's for anyone, CDCs, and it's been a mess. It's been a quagmire. So last January 2011, the managing director's office started convening all the city agencies that own property and any related agencies for a conversation about what they wanted, what should happen, how do we coordinate this, how do we create a better system. And what they came up with was that the redevelopment authority, PRA, would become the front door for all of these 3 agencies. And this is all in the green sheets, is that, so and that got launched in June. But what happened was that they then they were like, okay, PRA is going to become the coordinating agency, we're going to have a website, you're going to be able to search for property on there. If you want to inquire as to a property, then you call PRA first and they send you wherever you need to go, but they have all of the information in one place. That's great, it streamlines the process, it creates a more transparent process, everyone's doing the same thing. It depoliticizes a little bit too, because it's historically been very much related to the council people, and whether the council people were able to walk you through. And if you go to the back of your sheet, it has the website at the bottom for how you start looking on for city-owned lots. So what PRA developed was this, you can search on a list and you can also search on a map. You search by the address, and if it's available for sale, it'll come up as available, and you can come up on the map, and then you can file what's called an expression of interest. So I'll talk about the purchases now. The new set of policies that are informed by that work we did in December create some different options for gardening and farming on city-owned property. So they basically say that, I mean, you can, if you want to pay fair market value for any lot, you're good. Go for it. The city loves that. So that's, you know, that's anyone. But if you want to get a discounted price, you go to them and you say, I want to do an economic development project, I want to do a community development project, and they have some idea of how that's defined. But to be perfectly honest with you, I haven't seen a project, it's just started in June, they haven't really fully defined either of those things. So they're gonna have to help talk you through what that means and why, you know, the criteria for getting you there. And if you want to purchase a lot through one of those programs, you know, get in touch with me and I'll I'm trying to figure out who's kind of piloting that. A few other options. One is if it's a side lot, and this was an old program that they brought back. Is if you have a lot, if you own a home, and there's a vacant lot that's adjacent to your lot, you can, either next to or behind or whatever, you can purchase up to 2 lots. As long as they're under, I think, 5,000 square feet, and as long as the market value of the 2 of them is under 15 grand. And then you can get those for $1, plus costs. So the costs are going to be like $5.
But your house has to be adjacent.
You have to own your house, and the house has to be adjacent to it. You also have to, if there's someone on the other side, then the city's going to contact that other owner, and you're going to have to sort of work it out between you. But the city's actually open to splitting them down the middle. So this is the side lot program, and it's for homeowners that want to do this, it's actually a really good option.
If you get granted, you purchase the lot for $1, you still have to pay taxes every year.
You still ultimately have to pay taxes every year, yes.
Okay.
Your taxes are probably going to be less than your house. It's going to be valued less than your home.
So it might be like $5,000 a year.
I don't know.
Less
It really depends. What's that?
Less than that.
Yeah. So the side lot program of anything that has just been launched, that's the one thing I know that has started moving forward. That people are doing that. And then the fourth thing for purchasing for like a discounted or nominal price is for well-established community gardens on city-owned property. They have cracked the door open to say, okay, we will on a case-by-case basis evaluate whether we will sell these to the gardens. And this isn't really the case, I think, in this group, but for other folks I work with where the garden has been there for 5, 10, 15 years, that's actually a big deal. What's going to come up is those areas where the market value has gotten really high. So those are the options for selling. A couple things about that. If it's something that you're interested in, you want to read all the policies that PRA has online. You also know that for any sales, you need to have approval from your council person. So those are the purchases. You do have to, I think, fill out some sort of a conflicts form, when you actually get to the point of purchasing, to say, that to let you, like if you had relatives that worked in the city, you'd have to let them know. And you can't owe the city taxes. So that's another thing. It's just that, like, if you owe the city taxes, you have to have some sort of agreement to pay. So they know, okay, we're giving you something for a discounted rate. We want to know that this is not going to come back to us. Yeah, exactly. Options for more of a shorter term agreement. And there's 3 opportunities that the city's created. One is what they call individual garden licenses. So that's back, square one, the urban garden agreement. You and your family want to be on the lot to grow food for you and your family. That's what you want. Okay.
No, that's what I have.
Oh, that's what you have. Okay. Again, it's a 1-year license, revocable at any time, but because it's just you and your family, you don't have to get liability insurance because they're...
Mine's been 15 years.
What's that?
Mine's been 15 years.
Wow. And you've been renewing it ever since? Oh, good.
Well, I have, it's a school nearby, and I had the children to come and teach them gardening. And then some people, they have a backyard, but they have concrete, so I showed them how to plant in baskets.
Okay.
Or milk crates.
Well, so you might think that's an individual community garden. The city's probably going to think that's an individual garden. The city's probably going to think that's a community garden because you're inviting people besides your family to come to the garden. So, just to...
There was a dispute with the builders. They lost.
What was the dispute with the builders?
They wanted to take over the land.
Who owns the land?
I do.
Oh, you own the land. Oh, well then we don't have to worry. Then forget about it. I was thinking if the city owned it.
They offered me $30,000, and I said, I'm not poor.
You're good.
I said, if you're willing to give me $2 million, you can have it.
All right. That would have been a lot of lots. So, so for individual garden licenses, no liability insurance, but revocable at any time. It's kind of the same deal, but it's good for a bunch of folks. The second option is community garden licenses and leases. What the city has said verbally to me is that they're open to leases with the city for community gardens of up to 5 years. And after 5 years, they're gonna have to reevaluate. But with that, you're gonna need the letter of support from the councilperson. They're also gonna expect you to get liability insurance. And they're gonna want some sort of partner organization. They're not requiring the, you to be a nonprofit, but they wanna have some kind of partner organization that has some legal entity for it to be a community garden. They want someone to sign the agreement, like some sort of entity that that's going to take responsibility. So that's something that we're still sort of working out. Like, well, what does that look like? I think they're gonna have to see on a case-by-case basis. And the last thing is for market farming, for people who want to grow food for sale. If you're thinking about trying to get ownership of a privately owned lot that's tax delinquent, it's very easy to figure out whether there's tax liens on it, but there may also be other liens. There may be, like particularly when a home is demolished by the city, they put that cost back on that property. So you can go to the Department of Records and ask them to talk you through figuring out where those liens are. But there's like, you know, the water department could put liens on there. There could be the demolition lien, stuff like that. So you want to, if you're going to think about taking on that debt, you have to think about that seriously.